Good evening, students. Welcome to part 2 of human rights discussion. So, I left you with discussing Uskogan's, right, peremptory international law that cannot be violated and that also gives universal jurisdiction for any country to punish a perpetrator of any of these heinous crimes, the crimes which are considered very severe. Okay, what are those 5 we talked about? The first one is slavery, right? And we talked about how slavery is a lingering problem and there are more slaves enslaved now than the number of slaves brought out of Africa, correct? And the second one is piracy, we talked about, correct? And the third one is genocide, which we're going to talk about today. And the fourth one is torture, right? And the fifth one is, any idea? War crimes. So we're going to talk about third, fourth, and fifth and explain and finish this class. So let's talk about genocide. When you hear this word, you definitely have heard of it, right? What does it come to your mind? What do you think is the definition of genocide? Any thought? Any idea? That's right. A systematic elimination. A systematic elimination as a policy of a group of people based on their religion, ethnicity, race, nationality, or religion. Okay? So they are targeted based on something that they cannot change, that they cannot, right? And so let's look at this word is a 20th century word. Even though genocide has been happening for as long as humans have been here, it is a word which was coined in the 20th century. It's a very new word relatively for the English language. I'm going to talk about the history of the man who coined that and the important contribution he has done to history. He's one of my heroes. We'll talk about him. Before that, let's talk about the 20th century because this is the recent modern times. So in the 20th century, what is the biggest genocide you think happened? Yes, Armenian Genocide. Armenian, for those who don't know how to spell Armenian, I'm spelling it here for you. Armenian Genocide. This happened in modern day Turkey. This happened in Ottoman Empire during the time of World War I. Okay, Armenians are Christians and they were targeted by the Ottoman people, which were Muslims in the now the area is modern day Turkey, and they were killed. About 1.5 million people were taken out of their homes, taken to the desert, and were killed. Children, women, forced marches out of their homes without food and water and starved them. And they said anywhere but in the desert, they should be thrown out. And the reason given is that they were helping the Russians who were fighting against the Ottomans. Yes. Okay, now you might ask, then what was the US doing in this? Okay, there was an ambassador, US ambassador, named Hans Morgenthau. He was there in Turkey, okay, our Ottoman Empire, and he reported to then President, American President Woodrow Wilson, that this genocide is happening and we should do something to stop it. But Woodrow Wilson was playing neutrality game at the time. In America didn't get into the war at the beginning, you know that, right? So he didn't want to get into that business of stopping those people. So Hans Morgenthau even talked to the officials of Ottoman Empire and said, like, why don't you guys stop this? And one of the highest officials in the Ottomans was perplexed by Hans Morgenthau's request. And he said, we're not killing any Americans. We're not doing this to anyone which is related to America. Why are you caring about this? And Hans Morgenthau couldn't understand. It's in the name of humanity I care about this. How could you do this to a group of minority people in your country, right? By the way, still now, Turkey has never recognized that they have done that crimes in the past. Forget about apologizing. Don't even recognize, even now in 21st century. About 100 years ago it happened, but it hasn't. So that was the first big modern 20th century genocide. Okay, at the time, there was no word for genocide. It's called atrocity, and usually it happens during time of war. And you might ask, I'm going to repeat many of these case studies, and they all happen during time of war. And you might wonder why during time of war. And Clausewitz uses a famous word in time of war, fog of war. Fog. There's a fog, and you don't know who's getting killed and who's not, and lives which needs to be eliminated by these villains gets eliminated. Okay? And so now, the next genocide, the big one, because it's a short lecture, I'm going to make it short and brief of this different anecdotes. And of course, we don't have the time to go into each of the genocide in detail. And you could take an entire course on genocides. In fact, there are classes taught on each of these genocides by some professors. So it's that much in detail and study. So the second biggest one is Holocaust. Yes, there are people who study an entire course on Holocaust. And in fact, Elie Wiesel, who was a Nobel laureate, taught a course where I went to school, Boston University, on Holocaust. So now let's talk about Holocaust. Holocaust happened, yes, in Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, right? Who targeted who? They targeted Jewish people. 6 million of them were killed by the Nazi Germany. It is a policy from the top down. Remember the definition? It has to come from the top down. Systematic elimination, not just in Germany. Every area, territory that Germany occupied, they went on to kill. Of course, the numbers vary based on regions, on the density of the population of the Jewish population. In Poland, enormous destruction. Okay, they even have a word shower, which means destruction, Hebrew. Anyway, so now let's talk about what the U.S. did and how it happened and what would we know about. So one of the things I want to talk about is you should try to check out this book. It's a book about what America did in all these genocides by one of my favorite authors, Samantha Power. Samantha Power, who was the U.S. ambassador to the UN, and she wrote her first book, which became a Pulitzer Prize winner. And it was written as a paper for a coursework in her law school, and then later it became a book, major book, and it won a Pulitzer Prize. Now, in that she talks about Armenian Genocide. We didn't do anything. Did we do anything at all, America, with its military might? Well, at the beginning of the World War II, we weren't a strong military might, but by the end of the war, we were the number one military might in the world. Equal in power, you could say, maybe with Soviet Union. But did we do? We did not intervene. In fact, there was a man, here comes one of my heroes, Raphael Lemkin. Lemkin is spelled, Raphael, you know how to spell, Lemkin. He was a Polish Jewish man. He was living in Poland, and he knew even before Hitler invaded Poland that there is a risk for all the Jewish lives. So he asked his parents and family to get out of there. But the parents and family, the dad especially, said, well, Hitler is not going to kill all of us. We're not going to live here. I've been born and raised here. I'm going to live here. So the son, Lemkin, got out, Raphael Lemkin. He went to England, came all the way to the US, was teaching at Yale University, and he heard on the radio that Nazis invaded Poland. That was the last time he heard from his parents. And most of them were taken to concentration camps and were executed, killed. And so he quit his job, Raphael Lemkin, from Yale, and moved to New York City. Why did he move to New York City? In the New York City, FDR was creating a new idea called United Nations to bring different countries together and for what is the goal of the UN? security and peace, okay, after World War II. So now Lemkin was sitting there in his 10 by 10 room in New York City and thinking about what this is happening in this world. And Churchill is speaking on the radio saying this is atrocities going on and we should do something about it, all this. And he was thinking, atrocity is a very broad term. We need a specific term to define this problem. So he went on to create a word. How did he do that? Well, because he was very good with language. He was fluent in more than 8 to 10 languages. And so he created the word geno and side. Geno like genetics, right? Side, homicide, killing. So Latin and Greek put together, genocide was created. Now only he knows the word. Rest of the world doesn't know. So now he started writing letters to the ambassadors coming from that time. It was mostly European countries. Other countries were not part of the UN. Coming from different parts of Europe to the United States. He was writing them in their own language to them, telling that we should create a genocide convention. United Nations should have it so that we could prevent such catastrophes happening in the future. If it does happen, the UN should take responsibility to act on it. Now, this is a very new idea. And many of the ambassadors are like, what is this? They didn't immediately act. And he would go up to newspaper people and talk about these things. And they're like, oh man, this guy, they would just run away from him. He kept at it. And he was, the greatest heroes are some who don't give up. Especially if the cause is larger than them. And that's what inspires me about him, like that he went and persisted. Finally, long story short, United Nations created a genocide convention. When they did, all the media came to ask Lemkin about his opinion. The one who just goes to the reporters and talks couldn't talk. He just walked and sat in a corner and said, I can't talk. And that was the honor he did to his parents. Lemkin didn't live long after that because, he was distraught with losing the family and going through this problem. And he was not taking care of himself. He died very soon. The United States did not ratify the Genocide Convention Treaty. Yes. Remember, we talked about ratification, which the Senate has the power to ratify. That means approve the treaty. The president could sign the treaty, but the Senate has to ratify by 2/3 majority. Why would the senators not ratify the treaty, you might ask? What do you think at the time, mid-20th century? War was over, Genocide Convention. Yes, the U.S. still have racial tensions with African Americans. Many southern states still had lynching going on, right? Lynching of African Americans. And, well, in the past, U.S. have a history of killing Native Americans. So the U.S. did not want to be dragged into an international court by an international law that they voluntarily have given up their sovereign power. Now, what do you do when you have a problem? You need another hero. Now that man is William Proxmire. Yeah, you probably haven't heard of him. I didn't hear of him until I read Samantha Power's book. And I couldn't sleep for a while. Proxmire. Look him up. He ran for, let me tell you a short story about him. William Proxmire is this candidate who is consistently, regularly running for office and not winning any elections. What he does? He's a long distance runner. When he loses the election, the next day he will be up and standing in the train stations, shaking hands and thanking people for voting him for the office. That is, the people who voted for him despite losing the election. And he will start campaigning for the next election. Yeah. And then one day, there was an election for the U.S. Senate. U.S. Senate. He was until then campaigning for U.S. House of Congress representatives. The governor of the state was running. He's from Wisconsin. And one of the radio hosts asked him in an interview, William, how are you planning to win this race? You have never won an election. And governor has won every election he has contested. And you know what William Proxmire said? Well, yes, all those people who are listening to this interview, if you have asked out a girl and have been turned down, you understand me and vote for me. If you have never lost anything in your life, vote for that guy. He went on to win the election. But that is not what the heroes are. It's not about personal glory of winning. He went into the US Senate. You know what he did? He was there for 3 terms. 18 years, right? Almost 20 years. Every time the US Senate convened, he got up on the floor and spoke. The first person to get up and speak, urging the US Senate to ratify that convention, the Genocide Convention. So you would think, oh, great that he gave a speech. What, 10 times? 20 times? 100 times? Few hundred times? 1,000 times? 3,200 plus times. There's only 365 days in a year, right? Almost every day he spoke, urging the US Senate to ratify that convention. Guess what happened? The Senate ratified the convention. That's why he is a hero. He doesn't need to care. He's a white man from Wisconsin. He doesn't need to care about people in other parts of the world who are minorities who've been killed by their own government. But he did. And he successfully done that. Since then, there's something called R2P, responsibility to protect. This is used as a term, hashtag responsibility to protect. Okay, in the UN, what does that mean, responsibility to protect? That means if a state kills its own people, then it's the responsibility of the international community to step forward and use force if necessary to stop that violence and save those people from a genocide. Okay. Now you might ask, did the US do it after that? Did genocides happen after that? Well, I'm going to talk about some of the genocides. The next one, third one, write it down. Cambodia Genocide, 1971. It's a small country. It's the poorest country in Southeast Asia. You should check it out if you are interested in travel. Cambodia Genocide happened under a communistic madman named Pol Pot. I'm going to write down his spelling. Pol Pot. Pol Pot. This guy, they waged guerrilla warfare for a while and came in and took all the people from the cities, took it to the town end, and shot and killed anyone who wore glasses, Buddhist monks, teachers. Well, 2 strikes against me, I'll be dead under him. You know why people with glasses, even if they're not teachers or anything? Why teachers? Why the Buddhist monks? Intellectuals. Yeah, wearing glasses is considered intellectual. Well, at least the perspective. You might not be a teacher, you might not be a Buddhist monk. Modern research also says, side note, wearing glasses people perceive you as smart. So if you're going to an interview and you have glasses, wear it. Pol Pot killed 1.5 to 2.5 million. That's 1/3 of the small country's population and buried them in shallow grounds. He said we had to topple a basket of apples to build a new society. And guess what? He was sending representative to the UN, the United Nations. Cambodia's Pol Pot's regime have United Nations representative. Why didn't the US or others do anything about it? Because enemy's enemy is my friend. The United States was fighting in Vietnam against the Vietnamese, not the Vietnamese. So, Cambodians and Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese don't go. So enemy's enemy is my friend. So the US did not intervene. You know how the genocide stopped or Pol Pot's regime ended? Vietnamese army intervened later, went in and overthrew his regime. So we didn't do anything. Okay, what's the next one? Next to genocide. Okay, these are things the US didn't do anything. All right. But here's the genocide I'm going to talk about where the US actively participated with the side which killed the people. Have you heard of that in history? You probably won't. You won't hear that in English in your high school literature. There's a wonderful book which was a Pulitzer Prize finalist, I recommend you reading, called Blood Telegram. Pulitzer Prize finalist. Pulitzer Prize is like Oscar of writing, right? Yeah. And Blood Telegram. So what's this? When did this happen? Huh? In the 1970s. Okay? You heard of Bangladesh, the modern day Bangladesh, right? In India, you know where India is, South Asia, and Pakistan, right next to it. Before 1947, all these three countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all are one country. It's all one country called India. The British, when they were about to go, based on the Muslim League's request to have a separate country for Muslims, created Pakistan, right? Pakistan, based on the acronym P for Punjab and K for Kashmir, all this letters put together. Pakistan, Stan came from Stan. East Pakistan and West Pakistan. Bangladesh was called East Pakistan. The Pakistan, modern day Pakistan, was called West Pakistan. It was same country, separated by thousands of miles. In the middle is India. Because the Muslims' population was densely populated there, so those two regions were put. There's no corridor in between as they wanted to have. So you had to fly from one nation to the other, even though it's the same country, right? Like we go to Hawaii. There's an ocean in between. It's not contiguous. Or Alaska, Canada is in the middle. You understand? Now, election happens in both the East and West Pakistan. Whoever wins the majority gets to be the prime minister who will be in Pakistan, the modern day Pakistan. I'm going to use Pakistan, Bangladesh, rather than to confuse East Pakistan, West Pakistan. So you'll follow the story. There was a dictator who took power, okay? And because he took power, because there was always the Pakistan's political leaders will win the majority and become the prime minister. But Mujibur Rahman, R-A-H-A-H-A-M-A-N, Rahman, won the election from Bangladesh, and he is supposed to be the prime minister. So Pakistan did not want Bangladeshi coming and becoming a prime minister, even though he is also a Muslim. So the Aga Khan became the dictator and said he's not allowing Rahman to take over power. You know what he did? Well, he sent military. He sent military through airplanes to Bangladesh, and they started killing. Now, you might ask, how is this America involved in this? Richard Nixon was the president. His advisor is Henry Kissinger, who was Secretary of State. The brilliant, Harvard-educated professor went on to become a national security advisor and Secretary of State. He later went on to win the Nobel Prize as well. He's advising Richard Nixon. And he told Nixon what's happening. They're using American weapons and American technology to kill Bangladeshis. And Nixon did not want to intervene and at least call the leader of Pakistan and say, stop, don't do that. Why? Because it's a Cold War time, and Nixon and Kissinger are trying to find a way into China, create a path into China, a relationship. Okay? And Pakistan is the friend of China who is helping America to build that relationship. So Nixon did not want to antagonize the Pakistan's leader who is committing this genocide in Bangladesh. So they kept supplying the weapons, and these weapons were used to kill Hindu Bengalis in Bangladesh in large numbers. And when I mentioned the book Blood Telegram, what's that about? Blood was the last name, happened to be apt, ambassador of the US in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And he wrote telegrams describing the atrocities going on and how America should stop. Not only did not Nixon and Kissinger intervene, but when the population of Bangladesh fleeing from this terror happening, running and overflowing into India. India was very poor at the time. It's a very fast-growing economy now, but at the time it wasn't. Flowing into India, India couldn't manage the immigration crisis, the refugee crisis, so India has to send in military to Bangladesh to prevent the genocide further happening. Nixon was thinking about waging a war against India and was moving the fleet to Bay of Bengal, which is close to India, right next to India. Well, one of the reasons is he did not like Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who's a woman and a strong leader. He did not like, and he was about to wage war. Yeah. Now that genocide, the numbers are not clear. It ranges from 300,000 to 3 million, conservative estimate to liberal estimates, 3 million. That's a genocide, which the United States knowingly supplied weapons. Okay. The next one, write it down. Even there are many other in between. I'm going to just touch on something important ones. It's not that other ones are not important, but for my discussion and move on. Rwanda genocide. Rwanda genocide happened in Rwanda, Africa. Who are the two groups? One is called Tutsi. The other one is called Hutu. So let me take this. Okay. Hutu, H-U-T-U. Tutsi, T-U-T-S-I. Tutsi is the minority. Hutu is H-U-T-U, is the majority. Okay? The Tutsis, what's the difference? They're different ethnic groups. You know what ethnicity is, right? Racial group is biological. Ethnicity is based on cultural components. It could be cultural, religion. It could be the type of food they eat, or the dress they wear, or the based on a language. But these people have everything in common, Hutu and Tutsi, except slight variation in food. Okay, and they themselves cannot tell the differences by looking at a person whether they are Hutu or a Tutsi. They have to look at the ID cards, many of them. These Tutsis have been in power. Power means they have been getting good jobs, good opportunities, because their colonial masters have given them preference. The minority Tutsis had a better preference. Why would the colonial masters give them better preference? They looked a little more Caucasian. They were all blacks, but have a little more Caucasian features. So they were given priority. And because of it, they had better things. And the Hutus kept talking about in radios and others in propaganda, the Tutsi cockroaches should be crushed. Cockroaches. Why those words? You know what the Nazis used against the Jewish people? As vermin as well, like rats and others. Why do you think the ones who want to destroy another group use vermin like cockroaches and rats and other words? Dehumanization. Write it down. Dehumanization. D-E. Humanization. One word. It is to make them less of a human, so it will become easier to kill or destroy. So this propaganda was going on, and then guess what happened? They didn't get guns to kill, or they didn't build gas chambers like the Nazis to kill. They got machetes, like knives, machetes, from China and started killing, mass killing Hutus, went on to kill the Tutsis. And moderate Hutus were killed. Moderate Hutus who were married to Tutsis were killed. In 100 days, they killed 800,000 people. That's about 8,000 people every day. Around the country, bodies everywhere. The United States was watching, it knows, through satellites and others. It didn't even want to call the word, Bill Clinton was in office, the liberal president. They didn't want to use the word genocide because remember, R2P, responsibility to protect. They just want to call it ethnic cleansing. Just semantics. Before they decided to take any action, 800,000 people were killed in Rwanda. The UN peacekeeping force, which was there, the top official of that, kept telling the UN, there is going to be a massacre here. Please send more forces for peacekeeping. He was disregarded. He was a Canadian. He's traumatized. Well, because people were dragged in front of him and killed. He didn't get to use any of his weapons. Well, at the time, the UN peacekeeping forces cannot use their assault weapons unless their lives are endangered. Now, yes, if civilian lives are endangered, yes, you could. And they were slaughtered. So, the reason I say these things is one after another. There's many genocides even in the 21st century. This is not 20th century end. Like Tamils, about 40 to 70,000 Tamilians in Sri Lanka, minorities, were killed, civilians, in the fog of war, in a civil war which went on for a quarter century and expunged. Same, if you take Darfur, right? The newest country to the world is South Sudan. Darfur, where black Africans were killed. Sudan was the largest country in the world, largest African country, landmass. The northern Sudan, which is Arab-based, came and killed the blacks. Oil was dry. Now, all these genocides, it's not just history. Just like the pandemics, which happened and happens and will happen again, these things will happen. And human rights, the right for life is challenged, and universal jurisdiction, what is it doing, is the question to ask, and the moral responsibility and the political responsibility of the international community to act, and the United Nations, US, in the age of globalization, what does the US do? Does it do the role right? Think about it. While you think about that, let's talk about the next one. Write it down. Torture. Torture. Yes. This is another one which gives the universal jurisdiction. I'm going to talk to you about a case. It's a case in the U.S. court, right? And it's between two people, Faladiga versus Irala. This case happened in 1980. Write it down. Faladiga versus Irala. Faladiga and Irala both are from Paraguay. They were living in 1976 in Paraguay. And Paraguayans, and it's a small, densely populated country, small number of people. Pina Irala, Irala's first name is Pina, P-E-N-A, was the inspector general who took Faladiga's 17-year-old son and tortured him and killed him. Okay. And later called one of Faladiga's other kids, sister of the 17-year-old boy, to identify the body. Faladiga went on to file a lawsuit against this inspector general in Paraguay. Nothing happened because he's inspector general. He had the power. Faladiga. Why was Faladiga's son tortured? because of Filariga's political activities. So it's a politically motivated torture and crime, which he couldn't find a justice for his son's torture and death. Filariga moved to the US. In 1980, he was in New York, and he saw Pina Irala in New York, happened to be there. He went and filed a lawsuit in the US Court of Justice. Now, it's called alien tort. Alien tort. That means foreign bonds could file in the US court because of universal jurisdiction. Pinala Irala was punished, was convicted. Now that case shows torture is punishable, universal jurisdiction given to any perpetrator of the world because it's a crimes against a humanity. The last one, write it down. This one, we could teach an entire course. I've taught an entire course on this last one, war crimes. I've taught a course called Ethics of the Use of Force, and I'm just going to discuss for a few minutes. And important, you have part 1, this is just part 2, and the US role. And war crimes, it's crimes done during time of war, okay, and against humans. Now, I'm going to use a Venn diagram, show you, that was in the ambassador who worked in creating the International Court, Criminal Court, ICC, US ambassador. He wrote a book, and I picked this Venn diagram from his book. It's beautifully explained. So I'm going to draw this. I'll explain what ICL is International Criminal Law, which is like say an international money fraud, right? Internationally hijacking people, anything, international criminal law. That's one circle. The international human rights law, IHRL, human rights law, which is any violation of human rights, the international law to punish the human rights. That's one. And this is laws of war. Laws of war, I've explained to you, us et bellum before. Look up nuclear ethics. Us in bello, us post bellum, right? In that lecture, I told you justice at war, justice in war, justice post-war. So before going to war and during war and after war, how justice should be conducted, how the right way to conduct. And if it's violated, that's punishable by laws of war, right? Now Geneva Conventions, Hague Conventions, those laws come under through this. Before that, you know how it started? I mean, it's a whole class lecture, but I'll just say it. It's called Liber Codes. Liber. This is a man, French dude, who came to U.S. before Civil War and wrote the codes, later called as Lincoln Codes, during American Civil War, that both sides follow certain laws, like you don't do assassination, you don't poison, things like that. And later evolved. Now you don't use chemical weapons. It's prohibited by international law, right? Dum-dum bombs, things like that. Now, the fourth one, IHL. This is just focuses on crimes done during the war. So now, the intersection of this, unique, all the four, intersection of that, there's a new law emerging called atrocity law. It's an atrocity law to prevent, or not prevent, especially punish, deter is the word I should use, deter people who are doing heinous crimes against humans in war, using war as a fog. And that is atrocity law, and that's emerging. So these are human rights law, and the United States contribution or non-contribution in some cases, as you saw, which they didn't do, and prevent some of the genocides. And some heroes like William Proxmire and Raphael Lemkin, even though he's Polish, moved to America and contributed. All this you have learned today, and look forward to reading your answers based on the lectures. Good luck.